Hey, fellow Giganteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. Okay, so we're back. We're kind of like going into the stretch run of our little relationship series. Our idea was that we'd first talk about maybe just a bunch of stuff, just general, big picture, give some people ideas, and then eventually get to the point where we talk about this in a more personal way. And we're definitely at the point where we're going to talk about it in a more personal way,
Yeah,
especially for this guy over here, which I'm gesturing with two thumbs towards me.
that's right.
This is my more personal thing. I didn't talk with Daniel about this in the beginning, but I had like a little pre-announcement I wanted to do about some stuff. It's something we were both talking about. So I think we're going to try to do a little bit of social media presence for us, which we hadn't really done at all. So we'll probably be going from our social media presence from 0 to like shockingly little to undetectable.
Right.
But the shockingly little will be a major step up.
Sure.
So I had some ideas about this, and I just want to put it out for people who listen, in case you never check this thing, because we never do anything on it. So why would you bother? So I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to do quotes from the shower curtain of wisdom from across the hall over there.
Mm-hmm.
I have some people that like really like this in my life. They like to get little wake up morning quotes that are kind of inspiring.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to try to do that. And I'm going to call it quotes from the shower curtain of wisdom. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones thing, maybe like Indiana Jones in the shower curtain of wisdom.
There you go.
He has to find it, you know. So I'll do that. And I think I'm going to start doing probably some short book reviews, maybe something that's relevant to whatever the subject matter of the week is for us.
Mm.
I think there are people who like that kind of stuff. And it's funny because books aren't dead. You know,
Books are not dead.
Books are not dead. People really like it. And people do come up and ask me at times, like, you have any thoughts about what you could read about this or that?
All right. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. I'll give that a thought. And so I'll probably try to make that maybe a little bit of a routine too, maybe at least do one a week or something. So anyways, if you're like, you'd be like, why should I ever check the Instagram for these people?
It's a good question.
They never do anything.
That's a fair question, Eric.
We're going to do it, and Daniel will do what he wants to do. But those are some ideas I had in my mind. I thought a little music too, maybe. And Daniel is like doing his keyboarding. You can see it over on over his left shoulder, the tantric shoulder, the left side shoulder of the.
Assuming you're watching the video.
Assuming you're watching the video. If you're listening to the podcast, you just have to take my word for it.
Right. Yeah, I think I want to put stuff from the show up. Actually, I'm gonna
okay, that's cool.
I'm gonna put quotes from the show because we have some people who listen who will often send stuff that they heard us saying in passing, and they'll put it in text. And when you read it, you're like, oh, who was that? And they're like, oh, that was you, or oh, that was Eric. I was like, ooh, okay.
That's quotable.
Yeah, that sounds good. That could go on a shower curtain somewhere.
I had the idea of doing that 1.2 in the very beginning, which you and I have both been dilatory might be the word for this, a little delaying in doing this.
Dilettante.
3 years of delay.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, I was doing it for some of the people because we'd have guests on like Mary Kay Ryan or Guy Newland or Robert Thurman, Lama Glenn H. Mullen, Dean Radin. A lot of our guests say really interesting things, maybe other people who aren't even as well known, Lady India or Johnny Osborne or,
Keith
Brewer.
Without the funk.
Yeah. Remy Delan, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, Remy. Yeah. Ashley. I mean, anybody.
Ashley. Yeah. A lot of people, if I missed anybody, I apologize. But, we have interesting people on who say interesting things. So either us or other folks, I like the idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
let's hop in.
So cool. And I think as we transition into the personal part of the episode, it's kind of a funny thing because probably the first review I'll do for this episode will be this book called Sex with Shakespeare, which is by this woman named Gillian Keenan. This is my transition if you're following along.
Oh, yeah. For those who are taking notes.
This crafty transition I just did. No, she's a journalist. And I think she had like articles really in big things like the New York Times, maybe the Washington Post and all that. But she wrote this book, which I think is really fascinating. I'll give a longer review maybe in the upcoming week or something, where she talks about the whole history and backstory of this spanking fetish that she has. And it's really bold because, she was a kind of a semi-known person. And all of a sudden she came out with an article in the New York Times about like, hey, here's my fetish, you know? And then it was probably in conjunction with this whole book she was writing, which ultimately is really cleverly done. And she talks about Shakespeare. She talks about her own life and her experience having this being so core to her sexuality. So I wanted to I'll probably do that as the review of the week. But what hit me was we've been talking about our own personal things. And I began to realize this is going to be really disappointing.
Mm.
Because you might think this is going to be so much fun. Maybe we'll reveal our spanking fetishes, or maybe it'll come out Eric will admit he's a furry or something, but it's not going to be that much fun.
Not.
It really isn't. It's going to be a lot more unfun than that, or at least less saucy probably, but still kind of important, I think, for my heart. All right. So for me, this has been a slow kind of thing. Daniel, I started this podcast some years ago and I thought, well, okay, given the title Gin and Tantra, eventually we're going to have to talk about what we think about some of these things, which are a little bit more emotional for me. We were talking pre-podcast about the fact that the moon is really, really close.
Yes.
My son pointed it out yesterday because it had come up in class and he was like, let's go look at the moon. So we did. And it was amazingly close. And you're looking at the moon and the light's coming off so strong. It was almost blinding.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't look at it. It had a halo around it. I was like, damn, you can barely look at this thing. So if you're a more emotional person, if you have the moon in Cancer, like some sensitive guy like me, as Daniel was teasing me before we got on the podcast itself. Yeah, you're feeling the feels. I actually woke up this morning with a little bit of lateral headache and a little bit of what they call plum pitchy in Chinese medicine. I had a little stuff in the throat. So I was even a little bit worried, am I going to be able to talk? Because for some reason, this is super emotional. But anyways, okay, so this is the thing that I've had in my mind, which will probably for me be honestly, the only thing I guess I'd feel scary about saying in the podcast. And it's a funny reason to be scary. But here's what I actually think. So what I actually think is.
Hold on, Eric. Let me ask you.
Okay.
So
Eric, I was building up to it. And you're like, hold on a minute.
Hold on. You got to back off.
Teasing motherfucker.
So Eric, what do you actually think?
Warm the person up and you're like, wait a minute.
No,
wait a minute.
back it off. Back it off.
Back it off. Just
tone it down. Tone it down.
Build that. Okay, go ahead.
So Eric, we've been doing these podcasts for 3 years. I mean, I'm assuming that you've been genuine and upfront, but I guess apparently not. What do you actually think?
No, I've been genuine and upfront, but just not on this subject matter.
Oh, got it. Okay, fair.
Just not on this subject matter. But anyways, so here's what I actually think about this. I think the thing that was hard for me to say is and is kind of going to be something I'm going to try to talk about in this episode is I think it is totally fine, totally okay to love, be in love with, have deep connection and feeling for more than one person. I think this is absolutely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong or bad about it. I don't think there's anything to feel guilty or ashamed about. Whatever you feel like you may want to do about that is going to be your own business. I think this will play out in different ways in different people's lives. We've been talking about kind of Carl Jung. I'm going to try to write this book on Carl Jung because I think he went through these experiences. We talked about his relationship with a woman named Sabina Spielrein, who's kind of another important kind of psychological thinker. And, their relationship may never even really have been fully sexual. I'm doing the research now. It's not really obvious what happened between them, but they obviously had something very intense between the two of them. And so I think these relationships are kind of based more on an emotional and intellectual intimacy. A lot of times they can be physical, they cannot be physical. And I think everyone will probably make their own choices of whatever they think it means. But in any case, from my point of view, I don't think there's anything to feel bad about in any way. And I think that's the thing that I thought would be the most important thing for me to talk about probably in these whole episodes. It's funny, I'll come back to it later on, but I was Jung does this thing called active imagination, where he goes on these inner journeys and he would talk to his spirit guides kind of, right? And he had kind of what looked like kind of a Gnostic philosopher named Philemon that he would talk to. And I have a practice similar. Not even thinking about it in terms of Jung, where I talk to the Buddhist goddesses. And I was like, well, okay, do I have to do this or not do this? And I talked to 3 of them. my trio of Buddhist goddesses. And it was interesting, Daniel. I'll get to it maybe more later on, but they gave different answers, which I
Mm.
was surprised about. I thought it would be one unanimous chorus of yes or no or something, but it was sort of a mix. They said different things. So anyway, they'll come back to it later on. But this is the thing I really wanted to talk about. And I kind of, knowing the show was Jin and Tantra, I thought, well, eventually these subject matters, relationship, love, ultimately sexuality, would have to come up in some deep way. So this is my thing, right? And I guess the big thing is, it happens. It's part of human life, and I don't think it's anything to feel bad about. But a lot of people do. So, and I want to explain how one comes to such an attitude. And then Jin and Tantra, this being the show that it is, I will tell tales of my own life to illustrate this. Because I think it touches on some very profound things, especially sort of an idea of like soulmatedness. But I thought first, thanks. I'll finish this little part up and I'll bounce it back to you. But I think for me, I should probably explain what the underlying attitude is I'm trying to get to a little bit more. So, because I think as I was trying to prepare this and I'm working on this Jung book, what I got to is the idea, like my fundamental, like metaphysical position. My big idea is something like we're living in kind of an enlightenment factory. The world that we're in is a field for us to get enlightened. And it's really hard to say how much I believe that's true, but like I really, really believe that that's true. Other
So
people don't have to agree.
Would you say that you want to believe that's true, or would you say you believe that's true? Because those are two different things.
I believe it's true, but I don't think anybody else has to believe it's true.
No, yeah. I mean, it's not, dependent.
Yeah. Now, if I talk from my own personal point of view, yeah, I believe this is true. I don't even have it to the point where like, maybe. No, I don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we talked about this a lot in recent episodes, especially around subject matters like this. Enlightenment, relationships, love, all these kinds of things. I clearly get other people don't have to agree with me. And I have people who I'm really close to who don't think this for sure. The worldviews are completely different. But from like the point of view that I'm coming from, I think regardless of whether you think this is true or not, from my point of view, it is. So even this other person doesn't think that, I think it is for them too. Though I wouldn't force it, like I wouldn't voice it upon them. I'm not here to convert anybody,
Right.
But anyways, that's how I think about it. And then like the next step for me then is that we're also in this kind of deep field of kind of, I guess, karmic or soulmate interconnection, that we can have these very deep interconnections with other people that are profoundly karmic, soulmatey things that are kind of working towards that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the way I see it. I don't have like a new agey sense of this. I know people who do, and their idea is more like before you're incarnated or before you're born, everybody gets together in some big huddle in some heaven and kind of decides, okay, I'll do this, you do this, hut, and we go or something. I don't feel that way. I don't have any judgment against people who do feel that way. And I know people who are very serious, who I respect, who have senses like that. I don't have that sense. But I still feel like the relationships that we have that are profound and deep are these kinds of relationships that are kind of soulmating. And I've talked about this with my kids, where I feel like that's who they are. And I talk about that with them, pretty bluntly, like, okay, I'm the dad now. Next time you can be the dad.
And Eric, say a little bit more about like soulmates, because I feel like there's maybe a better description. In the Western use of that term, soulmate is often referred to, as most listeners would probably understand, as like your mate, singular, right? Like romantic kind of mate. But you're saying, we're sort of soulmatey, or these are our soulmates. So what do you,
I think I'm reframing that term in the way that I like it more, because I don't know. I don't think there's like one mate. I don't think there's like one child. I don't think there's like one friend. I don't think that way. Other people can think that way, but I don't think that way. So I think I'm trying to like get the term and I'm trying to reframe it in a way that I like more, which would be like, I think these are just profound karmic interconnections with other people. I talked with Lama Glenn about this at some point, when I was kind of wrestling with this question some years ago. It's even like pre-pandemic. And I said to him, so what do you think about this whole idea? And he was like, well, in Buddhism, we don't have this idea like you're split in half and there's some other person that you have to like complete the coin or something. We don't have that idea. And if I look honestly myself, I don't think that's true, to be honest. Though, again, there's lots of spiritual tradition around this.
There is, yeah.
So in like something like the Kabbalah, they have that idea. And I'm like, I don't got, if someone had that notion, I'm not going to judge it or anything. But I don't feel that way myself. And it was Lama Glenn and I at the Theosophical Society in Chicago, kind of sipping like rum and coke after the retreat, talking as we do, because he's a beloved spiritual teacher and friend. And I was like, yeah, I think I probably think more like that, as I was thinking about this question. But there's no doubt I feel this way about my kids, and that's the language I use. We had this episode a bit ago, we were talking about my son, and he was going through a little existential crisis. What's the meaning of things? What's the purpose? I learned shit. I'm going to die. You're going to die. You got all French existential on me or something, like out of the blue at bedtime. And I was like, okay, hold on.
Let's get the coffee brewing, guy.
No. Yeah. Let's get the absinthe out. We'll roll our own cigarettes. No. I was just like, no with him. I was just, no, that's not how it is at all. It's not, I'm not going to force a view on you, but that's not how I feel. I think that, we're all on this sort of journey spiritually. We're finding these people who are very deeply connected to us in profound ways, and we influence one another. And now in this time, I'm your dad and you're my son, but some other time, you can be the dad, that's totally fine. Like I was saying before, or whoever we are. And so we'll always have this bond between us, and we're learning, and the things that you learn will carry on. That's my feeling. Right. So I think these kind of more profound connections, I'm totally fine calling them soulmates, because I don't feel like I want to be limited by some definition of like a broken coin with another half. I don't follow metaphysically that point of view. And I guess we'll get to metaphysical beliefs as we go through, because I think it does matter. But I think it could be like, family, friends. I was thinking about this, even I didn't put in the notes, but like you're a soulmate of mine, Daniel. I love you like a brother. And like if it wasn't for us meeting, a lot of things in my life wouldn't have happened.
Same.
I wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Also, I would not be doing this podcast,
because neither one of us would know each other.
That's true.
But like also the idea, like there's things that like I do because we know each other. And so I kind of acknowledge that. And I think of it in that way, which I think changes the value I place on the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether that's family or friends or kids, but some of these are, loving someone or being in love with someone in some deep way. And I think that happens. I think that's just part of it. I think for myself, multiple people have sort of been my guides for coming to this. So I think the Jung book kind of matters for me, because I think he was kind of ironically kind of a guide. I didn't think about him all the time, but he is a person who thinks this way.
Right.
Like you can kind of tell. And he talks about relationships as being like kind of alchemical, that people meet and they alchemically transform one another.
Yeah.
And that has been my experience, to be
For
honest.
better or worse.
Well, I think he's staying for the better.
Yeah. Well, it could totally.
It's not like talking about the thing where you mix the chemicals and it explodes in your face. It like blows your nose off.
Sometimes a little explosion between a couple people is good,
Yeah, things can explode. Yeah. But anyways, I think, I think he thinks of it in that way. I think, and this is, probably clear from episodes we've done, but I think Rumi's a guide for me on this too. With Rumi and Shams of Tabriz, which we've done episodes on in the past. But if you don't remember the Rumi story, Rumi was a relatively kind of conservative, maybe more typical kind of teacher of Islam.
Yeah.
Right? And this traveling mystic, Shams of Tabriz, blows into town. He's looking for kind of a soulmate. Like it's the whole idea of the story is that he asks, give me a guide to find someone who I can look into their eyes, who can hold my gaze, I think is the idea. I can find someone who can kind of share this space with me. And the voice comes and says, hey, find this guy Rumi. So he goes and he finds him, and they have this very intense relationship. They love each other really deeply. And I guess there's a question of what happened to them. Was it like sexual or non-sexual? It's two men, conservative culture. The tradition would say nothing happened to them between them physical. I don't have a problem with that being the case either. That might be very much true. It might have just been an emotional, mental, spiritual connection between two people. Maybe something sexual happened. I'm a 21st century person. I wouldn't care, you know. But in any case, you know, it reminds me of the Sabrina Spielrein thing. Who knows what happened between them, right?
Mm.
With Carl Jung and her, but something happened that was transformative, obviously, you know. And so you can kind of see that. I think that you can also see the hostility, though, because if you know the end of the Rumi Shamsa Tabriz story, what happens at the end is Shams probably gets killed, right? Like he realizes things are bad, he flees, then he comes back again, and they're kind of reunited together. Rumi becomes a poet, I think, when he first leaves. Never wrote any poetry before. He's probably what greatest poet that ever lived. Probably.
I would agree. I would. He's in a discussion. There's no doubt.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's amazing. And so, you know, Rumi discovers himself as a poet, an artist, a Sufi, a mystic, a whole part of his life that he never would have had otherwise. But there's also hostility, right? And you could kind of see that I think there's an underlying hostility to this whole point of view on some level. That kind of goes through, and you could see it in the Rumi story, because ultimately the way it is talked about is it's Rumi's own son who conspires to have him killed, because he's kind of like creating a public spectacle and embarrassment for the family. And that's the capper on the story, right? No one knows for sure, right? Shams is just someday gone, but the basic idea is that probably he was murdered, and probably murdered by people close to Rumi, especially one of Rumi's sons. So anyways, I think but that's a guide for me in how I think about things. I think certain tantric masters, obviously the Buddhist tantrikas, have an attitude like this. I think there are Zen masters that I like EQ, who have ideas like this, you know. And so I think I've had like influences in learning how to think this way for myself, again, with no expectation that other people would have to agree with me. Other people will feel different. But at least for me, I've come to this kind of attitude. And I think the most shocking part for me probably is that I think that these soulmate relationships are actually there. I think that's the metaphysically most prizing part for me. So for me, I honestly think it's real. I think you'll go through your life and you'll be like, that's a special person to me. I know this is a special person. And in a funny way, even in our relationship, because you came up to me when, you know, we were all the way back in grad school, and you came up to me and said like, hey.
Well, when I was in grad school and you were teaching.
Okay, I was just, you know, saying, okay.
Yeah.
But we were in grad school together.
That's right. That's right.
But you came up to me and you're like, dude, I want to, like, there's something that I think we need to do together of a spiritual type. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. And it like made me do stuff I wouldn't otherwise do. Is that definitely true? Hence the homoerotic tension. No, there's no homoerotic attention. But anyways, it was one of these things.
I was going to say, and now your butt hurts.
And I've never felt the same about my prostate. No, I think that, like, the thing is, it's really real, right? And who knows how this will turn out, you know, given the vicissitudes of different people's lives. I would say, I don't think there's any societal context for this in this society. There's
societal
no
context for what?
For the idea that you're going to be deeply in love with some other person. I don't think that really has a lot of space here. And we could talk about why.
In love with another person, and what do you mean, outside of your traditional relationship, or
I think especially if it's sexual, but I even think if it's not sexual, I still think that's hard for people. So I still don't think that's easy for people.
Right. I know, but I'm just trying to clarify what relationship are you referencing? Are you referencing like a friendship or you know?
Well, I think especially the ones where there's people are in love with each other, there's romantic things, there's the physical aspects of things that might be outside of a monogamous setting. There's no social context for that.
Got it.
But my experience with this, to be honest, is, and I'll come back to it because I did some stuff with Esther Perel, and I think this is really interesting. So we didn't talk about this pre-show.
No.
Mentioned it a little bit last week, but okay. We haven't done it like any notes or anything, but like Esther Perel says some really fascinating things about this, because I think even like really intense friendships people don't like.
Oh yeah.
But we can get to it. Yeah, we can get to it. So I don't think there's any societal context, and I don't even think that's a judgment. It's just not that kind of society. It just doesn't have that wiring in it. It's just different. And I think the Esther Perel stuff is kind of helpful, so I guess we'll get to it.
So what would be, you know, if we're playing for playing fair,
Uh-huh.
what do you think some of the benefits for having that be, we'll call it taboo for the sake of this conversation? What would be some of the benefits that you would think that, why would that be beneficial for being taboo?
Well, let me bounce ahead and I'll go to the Esther Perel stuff and we'll like kick it around.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So, because I didn't know what order we're going to do this in.
Right.
So, okay, we've done some episodes on Esther Perel.
Yeah.
She is kind of a couples therapist. She's more trained kind of in a little bit of a neo-Freudian kind of a style, I think, originally. So she's interesting. She fit into some of the episodes we did where we were talking more about monogamous relationships and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But she, she really counsels all kinds of couples. She's an interesting person that she's also cross-cultural. She's from Belgium, but she's worked with couples that are cross-cultural, especially, and worked in different parts of the world. So she's a really interesting person for this. And so, and I'll hook up a link to one of the Instagram posts since we're going to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
People can listen to her talk for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But she says, she said she's getting interviewed. I don't even know who the dude is who's interviewing her. It seems like it's some random movie, but it's a little clip you can find. So I've been doing this research for this book, and she says, okay, there's lots of frameworks for which you can look at how people think about relationships. But she says the big thing is like the exclusiveness model versus the uniqueness model. And I got to the point where I'm thinking like, this almost seems to me like maybe you can call these orientations. So she doesn't use this word, but I'll use it. A uniqueness orientation and an exclusiveness orientation. What struck me in listening to her was how close this was to like the actual language that people use. So I was really struck when I was listening to her, like, yeah, this is exactly how people talk. And it made me kind of think, okay, she's a clinician. She's been listening to people for years. She's using the exact words that people use. So let me bounce this uniqueness orientation off you and off the listeners, and you can see what you think. I'll do that one first. So what she says is, the people in the uniqueness orientation, their general attitude is something like, when they look at another person, they say, what we have between us is unique. And that is what I value, that uniqueness. That's what I want, the unique connection with this other person.
Mm.
If this person has some connection with somebody else, this doesn't bother me. Because I know that what we have is unique and that's what I want, this isn't threatening to me. I feel the uniqueness and the specialness of what's happening between us, and whatever emotional, even physical connections that person might have with somebody else, that doesn't threaten me because that doesn't undermine my sense of that uniqueness. And again, it's striking because it's the exact word. Like, I think in my own head, that's the word I use. Like, I think, okay, my connection with this person is unique or special. I have valued it this way. Ergo, that's how I'm going to act. I think this is a special thing. I've made this conclusion. And then whatever else happens after that is fine with me, but I valued this thing. And so I asked it to some other people too, real quick. I asked it to some other people too. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about this. 2 people who have this similar kind of mindset. And they're like, yeah, that's exactly the word they use. They use unique.
So would you then, would this be analogous to say something of the reframing or redefining the soulmate idea?
Yeah, I think I feel that way. Yeah, it's some kind of combination of like intellectual connection, emotional connection, some kind of feeling of bond, potentially with also feeling of romantic feelings, attraction, those kinds of things too. But it's this sort of things, Okay, so that's one side. The other side of this is what she calls the exclusivist orientation. I'm going to try to be even more fair than she does, because when you listen to her, she sounds a little bit more harsh about it than maybe what I think we even want to do. But it made me think, Esther, I wonder what she's really like in her personal life.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Esther, you saucy minx.
Minx.
It made me start thinking, But anyways, we're going to try to be fair about it. So, but I think I'm also going to try to quote her as close as possible. So people can fact check me on this, but I'm going to try to be as close as the words that she uses. So in the exclusive orientation, what she says is that that person feels like what I have with you is made special by the fact that we do this exclusively with one another.
Right, that nobody else has.
That gives this the specialness, right? I had done a thought experiment with like an old friend of mine. He likes these like ethical riddles, like you see a train going down the track and there's 3 people strapped to the rails. and you know that they could die, you could flip a switch and it'll redirect the train, but then one dude will get killed. Do you do it? Do you not do it? He likes that kind of shit. I don't. I don't know if you like that kind of shit either, Daniel. I'm not into it that much, but anyways, he likes these ethical riddles. You're stunned into silence.
I mean, whatever you say, it's just a point of argument. Someone's going to be like, well, but then his life, I didn't tell you that he was a philanthropist and a father of 12. And now those youngest son's going to kill himself at the age of 15. And
the guy turns into an axe murderer and he kills another more.
Right. Exactly.
People that wouldn't. Yeah.
So way to go, dummy. It shows you where your morals are.
Yeah, no matter how you answer, it's a bad answer, right?
Bad answer. Oh, you let them all die. Oh, no problem. You heartless son of a bitch. There you go.
Don't you care about the lives of those?
What's wrong with you? You just, like, why don't you go save them and then murder them yourself? How about that?
I think, yeah, it's a certain kind of personality. So he likes this kind of stuff. Sure. So I said, can I ask you like a tough question? And he's a good sport. So he said, yeah, go ahead. Ask away. I love it. Ask me something. I said, cool. Let me propose this to you. If you had a thing where you could still be with, he's married, so you could still be with your wife, but be with other people. But she would also be able to be with other people too. You wouldn't lose her. Like your relationship will continue to go on forever. But, you both have to have this thing happen. Would you do that or not do that? And within like a nanosecond, like faster than any Jeopardy answer ever given in the history of the show, he was like a hard no. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And I was trying to go like, well, why? And I thought about our episode we had done about serial monogamy. And, one of my other old friends I had talked to who had said, that he had had these poly experiences and it had kind of made him, it had kind of got him to the point of like security and insecurity. These issues had come up for him. And he thought about that pretty deeply. It kind of changed him. He felt like a more secure person probably in the end, even though that wasn't for him. So I asked this friend of mine that I had posed this riddle to, well, is it insecurity or something? And he said, no, it's not. Like, it's part that, he said. He admitted that. But then he started saying like it has something to do with like a sense of like specialness that he wanted to have, with this one partner. And that somehow if that specialness wasn't kept, that would sort of ruin it for him. And I was like, okay, I understand. We had a little bit something before that because he said something about time. Well, you need time for relationships and all that. And I went, well, I said, Carl Jung was with like his wife and Tony Wolff for like 40 years. Is that enough time? It's a lot of time. And then he got a little snappy with me. And he said, well, do you want me to answer the question or not? Or you want to argue with me? And I was like, okay. So I slowly.
All right. Back to the moral question.
Stepped back. Okay. And I said, well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything. So we were fine then. And then he answered this thing about like, and then he said something about, well, I would want my wife, my partner to be able to be there when I want her to be there. So there was like an immediate time thing for him. And I was like, okay, so that's how he feels. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And I wouldn't, argue against any of that. That's how the dude feels. But that probably wouldn't be like how I would feel. And so I was like, okay, there's just like individual difference with this. But we get back to the Esther Perel thing. So here's how she talks about this. She says, for the exclusivist orientation, what's really important for them is she uses the word restriction. So she says restriction and boundaries, and then she says borders. Now, what really struck me about that is like, that's exactly the language that people use. Like they talk exactly those words, boundaries, borders, like that's exactly the word. So I was like, God damn, Esther, you nailed it, because it's like the exact language. And you could tell she's just kind of reporting what she's heard. I don't know about restriction. I don't think people who feel this way think of it as being restriction. Oh, I think what's that?
Depending on how happy they are,
I suppose so. Well, that's a different question. Because that gets to like, okay, that gets to the okay, we'll do it. But she starts talking about these things, and like for me, I can say as a uniqueness person, like I don't even like those words. Like they're not part of my vocab.
Right.
I would never say boundaries, borders. would never even occur to me. I asked a couple other people about this, and I was describing Esther Perel stuff, and they were like, no, I would never use those words. Those words don't even occur to me.
This is why I'm totally against building a wall at our southern border. It's
But that might be why all those MAGA people like it.
you know
They're
what I
all
mean? Like
like,
it's
born again Christian
it's metaphysical.
monogamous people.
It's analogous.
Uh-huh.
We want the flow,
We're both just teasing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think that. And so, but like when you talk about restriction, and then I think you can't get away from the idea of repression,
Right.
because you might have feelings for other people that's going to have to be repressed. But like we talked about in our episode about this, that's kind of a good thing,
Yeah.
because you need that mechanism to be able to kind of make this sort of style of life work, which is fine, but it's probably going to have to be part of how people are going to be.
Mm.
So it's like, it's kind of interesting then, right? But I think what you were getting to would be, does everyone who's in this style of thing really want it or not want it? That's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe one we'll get to. But anyway, she goes through it. She keeps talking about this Esther Perel. And she says, the uniqueness people like want to elevate specialness. And it is in the context of what exists between the two people. Now, she says this takes like a certain kind of maturity, more maturity and more differentiation between the two people. I don't know if I would say that or not, to be honest. I don't know what more mature or less mature about this would be. But anyway, she says that, so you can listen to it for yourself and you can kind of decide what you think about that. I don't know if I would intrinsically say there's something more mature or less mature about this. But she said it's also like not for the faint of heart, because it can bring up for people who are more exclusive minded things of like vulnerability, jealousy, insecurity, and maybe trigger like attachment issues they might have psychologically. So it's something to think about. But anyways, she says exclusiveness says something like, you giving up your freedom is what makes me feel secure. So some of that, it strikes me, might have something to do with like a certain kind of sacrifice. And I think there is probably a part of at least American culture we can hear from our other people across the world.
Wait, say that again, Eric. You giving up your freedom?
Well, she says something like, for the exclusiveness minded person, that other person, I'm the exclusive minded person, you giving up your freedom makes me feel more secure. That shows me how much you value me.
Mm.
And so that speaks to that person,
mm-hmm.
Their psychology, their orientation towards things, which gets me to this idea. There's probably something about sacrifice there, because it's a, at least in part for America, it's a Judeo-Christian vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it even comes up in other things. Like I was watching with my daughter before she headed off to Paris. She's off in Paris. Last night, she was out till 4 a.m. with a bunch of gay French artists that she met with some other friends of hers. And they spent the night like hanging out on this houseboat. So she's having a good time.
When in Paris.
Already. Well, yeah, when in Paris. But anyways, we were watching American Horror Story, 1984. Watched the whole season. And I won't spoil it for people if you haven't seen it. I think it's pretty good. Came out like 6 years ago or whatever, but okay. So, but anyways, it got to the end, and the conclusion of the story, there's this whole thing about like, that's what good parents do. They sacrifice themselves for their kids. That's like the last lines of the whole thing. And they played this kind of sentimental 80s song that the guy from Genesis wrote when his father died. Anyways, it's a whole big ending to the whole climax of the whole season. And I looked at her and I was like, I'm not sacrificing myself for you. I don't feel a single moment of this is sacrifice. It never crosses my mind. The word never occurs to me. I enjoy you. I don't feel any of this is sacrifice. And I don't want you sacrificing yourself for your kids either. That's not my paradigm. That's not my way of looking at the world. But I think for some people that is, right? And that adds energy to who they are, right? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people feel that. And then Esther Perel kind of continues off with this idea that in the exclusiveness thing, she uses this word. She says it creates the fantasy of a certain kind of oneness. So she uses the word fantasy. Take that for what you want to take it. I don't know if I use that word, but that's what makes it feel special to that person. like my friend I was talking about. This is obviously like a big deal for him. And if that was lost, then he would feel that somehow his experience with his wife, with this person, would be contaminated somehow, or broken, or ruined. Where like a uniqueness person doesn't feel that. The uniqueness person feels more like, what we have is special. I want to give you freedom. I want to give you experience. I want to give you those spaces to do that. And this is clearly like, it's so crazy because it's like exactly verbatim what people say. So you ask people, and you know, it's going to be, most of the people are going to be more exclusivistic. It's an exclusivistic culture. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if you can find people who are different, they'll talk one way. And the people who are more exclusivistic, they'll talk exactly the way she said. That's been my experience with it, you know? And it's interesting for me because coming from this more uniqueness orientation, the way she's describing it, like a lot of the language and the ideas in the exclusivist thing, I would never use those words. They don't even resonate with me, you know, but I can understand other people, they do. So, I mean, this got to the point where we were talking about judgment. I guess I might as well do this. You know, I had these conversations with my brother. I talked with him yesterday about this. He's much more like the exclusiveness guy, and I'm much more the uniqueness person. And we had this thing where there was my uncle got sick last year. We were doing a lot of caretaking for him. And if you've been through this situation, you end up spending a lot of time together, right? Maybe more time than you usually would with somebody, even if it's your sibling or whatever. So we spent a ton of time together. And what we realized was that, you know, in all our talking with one another, we got probably the closest we've ever been in our whole lives through this experience, because we really talked in the way that you do when something serious like that is happening. And what we kind of realized is there was some subtle feeling that we were both judging each other. Whether we were or not, it wasn't obvious, you know? I think some of the things we thought we were judging, we really didn't mean to be. But because we saw the world differently, I think there was this feeling like he felt I was judging his life. I felt like he was judging my life and how I think, basically judging our ways of being in the world or something. And we talked it through and we realized, no, this is totally fine. And even though we might not feel exactly the same way, this is totally fine. And it like flipped our relationship around like that. It was really amazing. And we've gotten probably as close as we've been since, you know, maybe when we were kids or something. You know, you have to go back to like, you know, my being in my teens and him being like a 10 or 11-year-old for us to be this close. So I asked him, you know, he's a very private person, but I said, could I share this? And he said, yeah. And so it was just sort of that amazing thing of like recognizing the individual differences, recognizing that people have different orientations towards the world and going, okay, you know, this is how this person feels outside of that framework of judgment. Anyway, so I wanted to share that part. Danny, I know, what do you think? I mean, you probably have stuff.
Well, no, let's go back to the question that I brought up earlier.
Yeah.
You know.
I already did, dude. I already answered it. This is the orientation of these two people. That's it. I don't have anything to say about who's better or worse. I don't see the advantages or the disadvantages.
No, well, I'm not saying
two kinds of folks. I got nothing else to say about it.
No, I'm not saying from your perspective. I'm saying that society has this as,
oh, I see,
what it is, right? So regardless of whatever, I'm just saying, like, you know what I mean? If you don't want to say it, if you have zero opinion on it.
No, I'm just giving the hard time because that was my answer.
Right. No, I know what you said was, let me say what Esther Perel thinks, and then we'll come back to it. And so
I think I agree with her. I think these are two different orientations towards the world.
Sure. And and that's I think, and I agree with that, or, you know, right. So, but then I guess my question is okay, so now that has been illuminated, right? That people who are listening to this are saying, okay, this is illuminated. And some people probably fall on one side or the other of the blade,
yeah.
Right? They're saying this is either psychological tendencies, maybe even we can go deeper, archetypes, if you will, right?
Yep.
Right. But then we are existing within another matrix, right? A societal matrix of moral, ethical kind of things that are, you know, newer or older or whatever, that are in place for some particular reason, right? And some things have lasted. This one has lasted beyond the grips of organized religion as the only source of connection to God or community or anything else, right? Even as time has gone on, post-enlightenment and things like that, right? Science is built, but this one still remains. And this one still remains almost ubiquitously across the world.
We disagree on this. So you and I don't agree on this point. But that's okay. Finish the point. But we don't agree. I factually disagree with you on this. But that's okay.
Well, I mean, you know, you don't think that it exists as
I have more like this. I knew this was going to happen. I have more the sex at dawn position. I have more the Esther Perel position. The monogamy is the new idea. It's not the old idea. The monogamy is the new idea. And it's a societal idea. So
right, but that's what I'm talking about. Society.
Yeah,
this
society here. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And what I'm saying is this is the predominant view.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that, like, as this is the predominant view of society, why would that be the case? What are some ideas as to why that would be the case? Because if people are having this, maybe not internal struggle, but let's just say observation based on this, right? So you talked about unique and exclusive orientations. And so someone could be honest and say, well, I kind of feel one way or the other. Right? But if one person is challenged, let's say some of our audience is challenged, or 50% of them is challenged on this idea, I'd be like, well, I could totally understand that, right? But we live in this kind of this structure really that doesn't afford people to really kind of experiment naturally, right, with this kind of a thing. It's sort of, you have to find a little group, but now you're stuck within a group, and that's like, it's like-minded people, but it's not exactly.
You not really even find a group that's that like-minded, to be honest. It
right. So how do
your views are? Mm-hmm.
So my question is, or my wanting to, as I want to discuss this a little bit as to, like, why would that be the case, and then how to work within and around that, because I think you have to see the rules in order to be able to kind of find the spaces within them. Of course, you can decide to leave totally, but you still have to know the game in which you're playing, because even the other people who might be like-minded are still playing within that game. They're still playing within.
I mean, let me throw it back to you first. I'll give my answer, but you asked the question, so let me ask you it first back, because you have a stronger feeling about this than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what do you think? You're more a Capricorn dude. You think more about the societal aspects in some ways than I do. What do you think about it?
Well, let me just, okay, so I'll start by saying that, like,
as opposed to, like, maybe like I'll have you answer it first and I'll kind of give my 2 cents.
Sure.
I'm doing a flipperoo because it's more of an issue for you than it is for me, I think.
Well, I mean,
I
think it's an issue for everybody, whether they want to say it or not. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think that people should break with the society.
Of course.
So I think if you don't agree with it, you should break with it.
Right. But
that's going to be my answer every single episode.
Right. But for people who are not necessarily as bold or are working within that, you know what I'm saying? Because when, at least how I think, when you come to the finality of your decision and you're like, okay, now I've decided, that's a process. Right. Yeah. And in order to get somebody over the hump of their decision, whatever their decision might be, they have to go through various kind of steps or feelings or intuitions or however, you know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And so for me, this discussion helps people reframe their thinking from concept to actuality, so that they can come to that point and say, okay, I feel it, I think it, and I feel it within me now to be able to do whatever I'm going to do with it. Do you know what I'm saying?
But I think you're asking something about, like, why is the society like this?
Correct.
So I know. Do you know this posy wid thing?
No.
Okay. It's a great idea. It's like letters that stand for the purpose of a system is what it does.
Okay.
Right. So you look at the outcome of it. I had a lot of conversations with a friend of the show and beloved friend, Justin Key, about these issues. So he's like a Northwestern law grad. He teaches at Lake Forest College. So he's a kind of a faculty member there. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen any of the episodes with my friend Justin.
Yes.
And he would always ask this.
We should have him on again, by the way.
Yeah. No, we're slightly broken up.
Okay. Well, whenever you guys
we'll make up next week once my retreat is over. I'm on semi-retreat. We'll make up.
Okay.
He and I are always we're fiery soulmates.
Sure.
We're fiery soulmates. That homoerotic tension between us. No, that's not true either. We're both pretty cis straight guys. But in any case, he would always say, like, that's the reason I was getting a little saucy, because I don't know what you think about that question. Because my answer would have to be, and I honestly don't know what you think, but my thing, like, he would say, like, cui bono, kind of a lawyery term, like, who benefits if a society is wired a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Posy with the purpose of a system is what it does. So for me, I would probably have to say, if you look at it as a historical thing, a lot of this was to keep women probably, like, encaged.
Mm-hmm.
and it was a way of controlling women. And this issue still comes up currently in the society.
For
There was a
sure.
weird thing with like Justin Peterson, if you even know who that is, on Joe Rogan. You
Justin
probably know who
Peterson?
that is.
I don't think
Justin
that's his
Peterson.
name. Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Right.
That might be a Freudian slip.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Fuck that guy. But like, we could at least get his name right, you know?
Yeah, Jordan Peterson. So, and there's this weird thing where he's trying to say the society has to be reoriented back to where you force women to marry. Otherwise, you'll have too many single dudes running around. And they're going to get like be ornery and whatever. And I was like, and Joe Rogan looks at him like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? The genius Joe Rogan cracks that argument, and he kind of goes like, well, you're Mr. Libertarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you talking about? And he immediately picks up on the inconsistency in that. So this is such a weird subject, right? I was out with someone I want to have on as a guest, Anya Grimon, who's like a TCM person, traditional Chinese medicine person in our field, but she also has, as part of her professional life, I think she calls it Venus seminars or something. I'll have to look it up to get it more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But she wants to work with women who are having trouble, who've had trouble with their relationships, sexuality, sexual trauma. So she's really proactive on this. So we went out some weeks ago, and I was like, well, you're going to come on this podcast and talk. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So that's definitely something. And we were talking about this thing, and I was like, if I looked at it like a Rumi thing or a Jungian thing, like we talk a lot about medicines like ayahuasca and these kinds of things. We've done psychedelic episodes. Like one of the strongest drugs you're going to take your whole life is spiritual connection and love. It's one of the strongest drugs you're going to take. That's an alchemical elixir itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it led to this conversation of like, well, why were those substances so taboo? And it was like, because it would challenge your level of consciousness. It would change who you were. And so I asked her, do you think that's part of what happens with these things with sexuality? That you have to kind of like hold them into these boxes. You have to kind of restrict them because otherwise it will change people's level of consciousness because it's just as strong of a drug or love.
Yeah.
And she was like, because I've had this thought before. So I asked her opinion and she was like, yeah, there's probably something like that. So that might be a reason too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how you think. I honestly don't know how you think about this, but to me, I would say like, yeah, society wants people to live a certain kind of way. And as we've been talking about, I think if that fits for you, that's cool, then you're fine with it. And honestly, I thought about this a lot. If like what you want to do is be monogamously involved in an exclusivist way with another person, maybe have some kids, live your life working and run a small business, you work in corporate America, whatever. If that's the idea of like what works for you as a life, then this is like fucking Shangri-La for you. You'll probably be super happy here. You know what I mean? And honestly, I know people who are.
Yeah.
Right. I have real good friends who are like, yeah, this is probably who they are. This is their orientation as a person. I had like one friend who worked in corporate America since he was in his early 20s. And I was like, how does this fucking guy do this? I thought he's like the strongest guy in the world. I would like throw myself off the top of the tower where I was working. Like I couldn't do it. And as time went on, I realized it's not him being strong or something. This just doesn't bother him.
Correct.
Like he's fine with it. So that's a kind of an evolution in my thinking of this, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, society has whatever its motivations are. I mean, I don't know. What do you think the motivations are?
Stability.
Yeah. Yinness, stability.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but on the same token, right? So, I mean, I guess that sounds like bad, right? Like, oh, stability. Like that's not exactly exciting. You know what I'm saying? Like vanilla is not an exciting flavor.
Yeah.
But like without that stability, then I don't know that you have the opportunity to break away from anything. I don't know that you have the place in which from where you can grow. Now, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't cut you off. No, I'm cutting your flow, please.
I say now, maybe the argument could be made that, people would have been enlightened historically regardless because they were practicing and there was karma and that was going to happen anyways, but there was even structure then, right? The story of the Buddha, all the monks who had to leave their villages, leave their society to go and become live in a monastery and whatnot. But a monastery existed because it was outside of society, right? The sort of what do we call it? Like the battery for the spiritual practice is that coming out from the monasteries in some way,
Well,
But
I mean,
like,
like the Buddha just leaves though. There's no monastery he goes to. He just
no,
leaves.
no, I'm not saying
He's
he,
like
I'm not saying he went to a
free agent,
monastery.
you know?
I'm just saying he had a structure from which he left.
Uh-huh.
So I guess what I'm disparaging and giving credit to the structures that are in place for providing people the opportunity to break away.
So the only thing that gets me about this, Daniel, is this doesn't have anything to do with this relationship structure idea in particular.
Mm,
So like Tibet is a non-monogamous culture.
right.
I remember reading that in like Lama Glenn's book on the Dalai Lama. He starts talking about the sixth Dalai Lama, who's sort of like a little bit of a player, right? As far as Dalai Lamas go. Probably a lot of them aren't. I mean, we
Right,
know
at all. It's the fact
they're
that he had
not.
one
Yeah.
girlfriend was like crazy.
Well, but he was really like, he was kind of like a Dalai Lama fuckboy.
Oh, okay, all right.
But wrote a lot of poetry, you know, about love and whatever. It doesn't vibe with me for some reason, but anyways, he's sort of famous for this in Tibet. And but there's a passage where he just like Lama Glenn just says, like, well, listen, his behavior wasn't that unusual. A lot of people would be non-monogamous. There was no expectation that men or women would be. And it's a Buddhist tantric culture.
Mm-hmm.
Or and maybe we'll talk about more next episode or something, but there were, you know, there's the Moso women of Tibet, they're non-monogamous, right? And it's not like it's not stable. It's totally stable.
Sure.
It's just different. So, you know, again, you have to like think about what do you think that means. I also want to talk, I mean, there's other people I want to talk about because this I think is an interesting question, what you're asking.
Yeah.
I know it's a bigger deal for you. You know what I mean? I think you think about this more than I do, you know. So
I think like,
so like that's why I think it was kind of important to go like, well, what do you think about this? Because me, I don't think about this as much.
like, you know, the Tibetan culture, from my understanding, has been moved from more of a warrior tradition over the last, you know, 1,000 years or more, you
Yeah.
know, to a spiritual culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so their practice is one of nonviolence, you know, and domestic violence here in this culture is rampant, really.
I don't want to say domestic violence in Tibet isn't a problem too, because it is.
Okay.
You know, full disclosure on that.
I guess I'm just saying that, like, I don't, you know, part of it, you know, there's numerous reasons for which one, you know, could be moved towards rage, jealousy being one of them. And that happens even within relationships that are exclusive orientated, right? You know what I'm saying? I would imagine, at least again, thinking from how I'm thinking of just like maybe low level people, maybe I'm not giving society the benefit of the doubt. So that could be on me, right? Thinking like, right. But I would imagine that incidents could potentially rise, you know, and particularly against women in this case more than men, you know, if someone was to have an agreement with somebody else and somebody was, let's just say, better at doing that than another person, not necessarily only sexual, but just having a more magnanimous kind of open desire for what do we call it, unique connections, orientations in that way, that the other person may not. You know what I'm saying? And if if the person is truly in that orientation completely, then it should not be a problem based on how we're talking about it. But if somebody is kind of like a little bit in between or whatever, then it could bring up, you know, attachment could come again, because to me, what we're talking about,
if you're talking about like domestic violence, though, we have domestic violence in the West like crazy.
right? And I'm
like the number one way as a woman you're gonna get killed is by your partner.
For sure.
One of the number one reasons you can get killed is because of jealousy. And that's in this culture.
Correct. And that's
so
what
I don't know. I don't know what it means. You know, like it doesn't solve the problem to say,
no, it doesn't.
We'll make everything like super exclusivistic. People are still going to, and it's a klesha. Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about, we will next episode.
Yeah.
But this jealousy thing is a delusion.
Right. Well, that's
from a Buddhist point of view, right? Correct. That's crazy town.
Correct. But that's, so I guess I'm just like working it out loud as to like, what would be some reasons as to, because it's here, right? We could say however it was, want to break it down, that's fine, but it's still here. It still is in existence, right?
The thing that's so interesting, I know, have you read The Sex at Dawn?
I have not, no.
Okay, anyway, Sex at Dawn is, maybe we'll do that as a book review too. I should do that one. But like, this is the new thing.
Yeah.
This isn't the old thing. And it's so funny because there's a story that would go, there was this sort of ethical system that developed under like Judeo-Christian, Islamic, whatever. You have this kind of system, and as it like fell apart, because it used to be God told you to be this way.
Right.
Sartre makes this point, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, which my daughter will be studying at the Sorbonne when she's not out partying on houseboats. But you know, he says something about like, you know, people used to think God made all this stuff, and then they said nature made all this stuff, and then that's not true either. There's no monogamous oriented chimps. They don't exist. It's
Mm.
nothing. This is the new thing. For whatever reason it appeared, it was part of
Mhm.
some social structure that got built up. For
Mhm.
whatever reason, that's the sexadong argument.
Right.
So for whatever reason, this appeared. And like then the argument goes that because you needed a hierarchical societal system where you had somebody on the top and somebody on the bottom. So you
Sure.
stuck the women on the bottom, you put the guys above them,
Agree. Yeah.
and then you put the feudal lord above that guy, and then the king was above that one, and then God was at the top
Right.
of the whole chain. It's
Yeah.
like a chain of being, right? And then underneath, like along with the women, there were like the animals.
I
You
think
know?
I think for me, like understanding why that, you know, why that's there helps to break the chains more readily for me. You know what I'm saying?
For me, because like again, this is something that you and I so you have a kind of an ambivalent feeling about this from my point of view, but I might be wrong. To me, I think you think, well, you need this stability and the society needs to have this structure
You do.
in order to have the stability. Um, but then you also kind of like it's the other part of like, well, people probably individually have to break from it. Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the
Okay.
reason
And you see this then as being like a good and bad thing at the same time or
I
something.
do, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a bullshit argument, to be honest, on my part. You know what I'm saying? But the
It's
place that
kind of
it
a theme
comes
that
from,
runs through the episodes. Like it comes up periodically when the subject matter comes up. And I'm always trying to figure out what does Daniel actually think about
yeah.
this?
So I think that like there are, and you know, we only have like 2 or 3 minutes to finish it, but I will finish it. You know, because I think it's because of my experience at war, and because
Uh,
I do pay attention to international politics, maybe more so than the one in the United States. And for those who don't, there is a whole world of shit that is going on currently all over, you know, still currently. Other countries ruling other countries, and not just politically, but like with an iron fist. And when I say iron fist, I mean at the end of a barrel of a tank or a rifle, or, you know, there's still modern day colonialism, literally, not just like metaphorically, like actual other countries taking all of the resources from other places in the world. And because I've seen, like, you know, this kind of drama firsthand, I know the from my own experience the depths to which people can be absolutely brutal, like real brutality. You know what I'm saying? Not Jordan Peterson discussing a civilized Western man as a quote animal. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, real gross human behavior, right? That
you're thinking
it's,
about like societal chaos or
yeah,
something.
yeah, like, you know, like momentary psychosis, right?
Mhm.
And then, oh well, now I'm back to normal now. I don't, you know, I just blew up those guys, and now I'm going home for dinner. You know, hey, no big deal.
Yeah.
Like, I got to get home to my family. You know what I'm saying? Like this kind of shit. But because I'm aware of that, I'm like, well, it's better not to be in that state. If that's the end state, if that's complete and utter chaos, well, then maybe some like discomfort and some other forms of suffering that are definitely not as bad as that are a better choice than that.
But the
Right?
thing about that is like human beings have lived all kinds of different ways
For sure.
over the time. So you don't need this one necessarily just to create this, you know?
Right.
That's the part
There,
that bothers me. I don't think you need to have there's a kind of an argument, I guess it's a Jordan Peterson type argument. You need to have this, otherwise you have chaos.
yeah,
But you know, I don't know, you make that argument 100 years ago, and there's a whole bunch of people who are stuck in really shitty positions
sure.
where you're saying, okay, you have to be in this shitty position, otherwise we have social chaos. Sorry about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I'm not
I
saying
don't
that.
that part always bothers, you know what I'm saying? That part always bothers me
Sure.
about
And I'm not, this is not the this is not the utopia.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I'm just saying in potential comparison, not, it's not a one-to-one, but in potential comparison, what you would have as choice wise in that scenario is extremely limited, extremely limited. So like I said it before, like on one hand, I think that we are sort of in like invisible prisons in one level, you know.
Mhm.
It's, for me, it may be better to be in an invisible prison that I might be able to get out of than be in an invisible hell that I will not.
I mean, it might be true. I don't know. Like this is
I
the
don't
part where
know.
like this is a difference in somehow like our karma orientations to how we think about things or something. Because
Yeah.
these questions are bigger for you.
Yeah.
I always think like you're a Capricorn. I'm a little Gemini, So, but anyways, all I can say about that is like, I don't think my saying this stuff or proposing, we'll continue this maybe next episode.
Yeah,
but
we
my
have to.
proposing a different way of doing things isn't going to topple Judeo-Christian culture.
No.
It ain't going to happen.
No.
So as a matter of fact, the one thing I had with my friend Justin was like, the big change is divorce. If you want to talk about a change, the fact that people can divorce at the rate they can divorce, that's a change.
Yeah.
You worry about some little people who are like, are going to have alternative relationship models. That's like a small percentage of people.
For sure.
That's not the thing that had impact. Divorce, that's a huge impact, because maybe 50% of the people are going to do it, whatever the number is.
Correct. Yeah, it's about 50.
That's a big deal. And like in my parents' time, you couldn't do that. They're silent generation.
Correct.
That's a boomer thing. So you want to talk about what changed society? That changed the society.
Yeah, I agree.
Is that destabilizing? I don't know. I don't think any of us would want to take it back.
No.
But I mean, that's a huge deal. Then you really did change the society, right?
That's fair.
Yeah. More so than any of this stuff. I don't think, like, I know
they're trading
in Chicago. They're not going to topple the world,
but they're still trading partners.
People who are doing this,
they're just trading one for another one.
Yeah, but it affects kids. So
100%.
The Dalai Lama. I had a friend who saw the Dalai Lama, and there was a woman in the audience who was like, "I want to get divorced," and she had all this ethical churning inside of her. Was it right? Was it wrong? And the Dalai Lama asked, "Well, do you have kids?" And then the woman said, "No." And then the Dalai Lama said, "Well, if there's no kids involved, that's an individual choice between adults. That's totally fine."
Yeah.
And my friend was really offended because she was like a big marriage proponent at the time. Then she got married and she's against it. But at the time she was really upset by the answer. And I was like, well, that's just a Tibetan answer, because you want to keep the stability of the unit, but you allow people to go and have experiences with other people. They answered that question in a different way.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it. We're going to have to leave it here.
Great. All right. You got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. At least it's a lively conversation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay. I had to share my experiences next week of why the hell I would come to a feeling like this.
Sounds
Maybe
good.
one more episode on this thing, but it's a saucy topic.
For sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, man.
All right. As always, thanks for tuning in
so
to Gin and Tantra. Eric, Daniel, we're going to say goodbye. Do all the things, like, comment, subscribe, share with us. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com, on Instagram at Gin and Tantra. Leave a comment in the YouTube. If you know us, text us, whatever, just shout out. Like, we appreciate all the love and the hate and all the things in between, because I believe that we are uniquely oriented people. Wink, wink. We'll get you guys.
I want to say before you go, thanks for the conversation, Daniel. This stuff is really helpful to me.
Good. Yeah. Well, I got to be a thorn once in a while, right?
Love you, brother.
Love you too. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.